All right. Welcome to our read aloud, My Side of the Mountain. Last time we were reading, Sam needed to get a door for his tree. Okay. He's caught a lot of animals in his little traps, but they're little animals. Can you make a door out of a rabbit skin or something that small?
No.
Cadence?
I mean, if you had the tools, the right tools, you could catch a lot of little ones and then put all the fur together.
Okay. So you could catch a lot of little things, sew it all up. That'd take a lot of work, right? What animal does he really want? Angie?
I don't know, but I'd probably say a deer or a bear.
He wants a deer, okay? The part of where he's living, I don't think there are bears. We never hear of bears. So, in this chapter, it's called A Door Came to Me. Do you remember what happened right when I stopped reading? Emma?
There was a poacher and he killed a deer and he brought it to the woods and hid it under and stuff.
Yes. Okay, why do you think Sam drugged the deer? He drug it away from where it landed and hid it under a bunch of logs and ferns. What's he doing? Hudson?
He's probably hiding it so other animals wouldn't eat it.
Okay. Who else is looking for the deer? Madeline? The poacher. All right. I'm going to have you predict. Those of you at home, think about it. Raise your hand if you think the poacher's going to find the deer and figure this out. Okay. Raise your hand if you think Sam's going to get away with it. All right. We'll find out today. All right. Okay, Baron Weasel's kind of going crazy, too. We had just read all of that. All right, so the deer ran into the meadow. It stumbled and fell. I had the impression that it was a deer. Without waiting to consider what I might be running toward, I burst to the edge of the meadow. Okay, we've read that part, I remember now. Okay, so he dragged the deer to the woods. Hurriedly, I put out my fire, covered it with dirt, hid my smoking rack in the spring, grabbed Frightful, and got in my tree. Someone was poaching, and he might be along in a minute to collect his prize. The shot had come from the side of the mountain, and I figured I had about 4 minutes to clean up before the poacher arrived. Then, when I was hidden and ready, Frightful started her cry of hunger. I had not fed her yet that morning. Oh, how was I ever going to explain to her the awful need to be quiet? That would be tough, right? Kind of like if you had a little baby that didn't understand, you can't cry right now, you have to be quiet. How did a mother falcon warn her young of danger? I took her in my hands and stroked her stomach. She fought me, and then she lay still in my hand, her feet up, her eyes bright. She stiffened and drooped. I kept on stroking her. She was hypnotized. I would stop for a few moments. She would lie still, then pop to her feet. I was sure this wasn't what her mother did to keep her quiet, but it worked. Bushes cracked, leaves scuttled, and a man with a rifle came into the meadow. I could just see his head and shoulders. He looked around and banged toward the hemlock forest. I crawled up on my bed and stroked the hungry Frightful. I couldn't see the man from my bed, but I could hear him. I heard him come to the tree. I could see his boots. He stopped by the ashes of the fire and then went on. I could see my heart lift my sweater. I was terrified. Was the heart really lifting his sweater?
No.
Is that hyperbole?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's exaggerating. Have you ever been in a moment where you felt like your heart was beating so fast you could see it?
I thought hyperbole was where you describe more than...
Well, it's an exaggeration, right? So are they exaggerating how fast the heart's beating? Yeah. Madeline?
Sometimes my heart's beating so hard that when I lean on my desk, it actually pushes me.
Yeah, you can feel it that much? All right. I stayed on the bed all morning, telling the fierce little bundle of feathers in my hand that there was deer meat in store for her if she would just wait with me. Way down on the other side of the mountain, I heard another shot. I sure hoped that deer dropped on the poacher's toes and that he would now go home. At noon, I went to find my prize. Frightful sat beside me as I skinned and quartered it. She ate deer until she was misshapen. What does that mean? Hayden?
Not in the right shape.
Yeah, if your belly gets so big, it's kind of bulging in all the wrong places. She's stuffed. I didn't make any notes as to how long it took me to do all the work that was required to get the deer ready for smoking and the hide scraped and ready for tanning, but it was many, many days. However, when I sat down to a venison steak, that was a meal. All it was venison. I wrote this on a piece of birch bark. I think I grew an inch on venison. Frightful and I went to the meadow when the meal was done, and I flopped in the grass. The stars came up, the ground smelled sweet, and I closed my eyes. I heard pip, pop, pop, pop. Who's making that noise? I said sleepily to Frightful. She ruffled her feathers. I listened. Pop, pip. I rolled over and stuck my face in the grass. Something gleamed beneath me, and in the fading light I could see an earthworm coming up out of its hole. Nearby another one arose, and there was a pop. Little bubbles of air snapped as these voiceless animals of the earth came to the surface. That got me to smiling. I was glad to know about this about earthworms. I don't know why, but this seemed like one of the nicest things I had learned in the woods, that earthworms, lowly, confined to the darkness of the earth, could make just a little stir in the world. So I never knew that if you really listened, you could hear earthworms popping their holes up out of the ground. All right, we'll read a little bit of our next chapter, which is called Frightful Learns Her ABCs.
What?
I know that was a short chapter. Free time was spent scraping the fur off the deer hide to get it ready for tanning. This much I knew. In order to tan hide is like the skin of your animal, so he's making his door. In order to tan hide, it has to be steeped in tannic acid. There is tannic acid in the wood and oak trees, but it took me several weeks to figure out how to get it. You need a lot of oak chips and water. Water and oak give off tannic acid. My problem was not oak or water, but getting a vessel big enough to put the deer hide in. So it's kind of like he doesn't have a bucket. He doesn't have big containers. So he has to figure that out. Yes.
Is he a kid or is he like a teenager?
He's a kid. I think he's about 12, 11 or 12. Coming home from the stream one night, I had an inspiration. It had showered the day before, and as Frightful and I passed an old stump, I noticed that it had collected the rain. A stump, an oak stump, would be perfect, I said right out loud to that pretty bird. So I felled an oak over by the gorge, burned a hole in it, carried water to it, and put my deer skin in it. I let it steep, maybe 5 days, before I took it out and dried it. It dried stiff as a board, and I had to chew, rub, jump on it, and twist it to get it soft. When this was done, however, I had my door. I hung it on pegs inside my entrance, and because it was bigger than it had to be, I would cut off pieces now and then when I needed them. I cut off 2 thin strips to make jesses, or leg straps for Frightful. All good falcons wear jesses and leashes, so they can be tethered for their training. So does anyone know, if you have a falcon and it's your pet, what's a tether? Does anybody know? Can you just let a bird with wings fly free?
No.
Okay, so when you have a falcon you trained, sometimes they have little leather straps around their ankles that you can like tie and hook to your arm, so that if the bird would fly away, it could only go so far and the straps would stop it, right? So that way when your bird is learning that it's going to be domestic, not wild, you can keep it with you. And he also might need something on his arm. Think about those talons. When Frightful gets bigger, can she just come land on him without something to protect him? Not unless he wants a bunch of cuts on his arm. All right. I smoked the meat. I couldn't eat and stored it. I used everything I could on that animal. I even used one of its bones for a spearhead. I was tired of catching frogs by the jump and miss system. I made 2 sharp points and strapped them to the end of a long stick, one on each side to make kind of a fork. It worked beautifully. Frogs were one of my favorite meals, and I found I could fix them many ways. However, I got to like frog soup fixed in this way. So if you guys ever want to make some frog soup, here's how you do it. Clean, skin, and boil until tender. Add wild onions, also water lily buds and wild carrots. Thicken with acorn flour. Serve in turtle shell. All right, raise your hand if you would try it. The half of you? I would try it. Okay, I've never tried frog. Raise your hand if no way, Jose, it's not happening. That's how I felt when I was your age. All right. By now, my 2 pairs of pants were threadbare. That means all the stitching's coming apart, so your pants are about to fall apart. Okay, so you're going to have to do something about that. My 3 sweaters were frayed. I dreamed of a deerskin suit and watched my herd with clothes in mind. So he's watching all these deer in the woods just thinking, someday I'm going to have a deerskin suit, right? The deer for my suit did not come easily. I rigged up a figure 4 trap under the log and baited it with elderberries rolled into a ball. That just mushed up and didn't work. Then I remembered that deer like salt. I made a ball of hickory salt with turtle fat to hold it together. Every evening, Frightful and I, sometimes accompanied by the bear and weasel, would go to the edge of the meadow and look toward the aspen grove to see if the great log had fallen. One night we saw 3 deer standing around it quietly, reaching toward the smell of the salt. At that moment, the Baron jumped at my pant leg, but got my ankle with an awful nip. I guess I had grown some. My pants and socks did not meet anymore. Okay, can you picture it? His pants are getting way shorter because he's getting tall. I screamed and the deer fled. I chased that Baron home. I had the uneasy feeling that he was laughing as he darted, flipped, buckled, and disappeared. The Baron was hard to understand. What did he want from me? Occasionally, I left him bites of turtle or venison, and although he smelled the offerings, he never ate them. The catbird would get them. Most animals stick around if you feed them. But the Baron did not eat anything. Yet he seemed to like me. Gradually, it occurred to me that he didn't have a mate or a family. Could he be a lonely bachelor, taking up with odd company for lack of an ordinary life? Well, whatever. The Baron liked me for what I was, and I appreciated that. He was a personable little fellow. Every day, I worked to train Frightful. It was a long process. I would put her on a stump with a long leash and step back a few feet with some meat in my hand. Then I would whistle. The whistle was supposed to eventually mean food to her. So I would whistle, show her the meat, and after many false flaps, she would finally fly to my hand. I would pet her and feed her. She could fly fairly well, so now I made sure that she never ate unless she flew to my fist. One day at breakfast, I whistled for Frightful. I had no food. She wasn't even hungry. But she came to me anyway. I was thrilled. She had learned a whistle meant come. I looked into her steely eye that morning and thought I saw a gentle recognition. She puffed up her feathers as she sat on my hand. I call this a feather word. It means she is content. Now, each day I stepped farther and farther away from Frightful to make her fly greater and greater distances. One day she flew a good 50 feet, and we packed up and went gathering seeds, bark, and tubers to celebrate. I used my oldest sweater for gathering things. It was not very convenient, and each time I filled it, I mentally designed bigger and better pockets on my deer hide suit-to-be. The summer was wonderful. There was food in abundance, and I gathered it most in the morning and stored it away in the afternoon. I could now see that my niches were not going to be big enough for the amount of food I would need for the winter. So I began burning out another tree. When the hickory nuts, walnuts, and acorns appeared, I was going to need a bin. You'd be surprised what a pile of nuts it takes to make one turtle shell full of nut meats. And not a snapping turtle shell either, just a box turtle shell. With the easy living of the summer also came a threat. Hikers and vacationers were in the woods. And more than once, I pulled inside my tree, closed my deer flap door, and hid, while bouncing, noisy people crossed the meadow on their way to the gorge. Apparently, the gorge was a sight for those who wanted a 4-mile hike up the mountain. One morning, I heard a group arriving. I whistled for Frightful. She came promptly. We dove into the tree. It was dark inside the tree with the flap closed, and I realized that I needed a candle. I planned a lamp of a turtle shell with a deer hide wick, and as I was cutting off a piece of hide, I heard a shrill scream. And that's where we're going to stop today. All right, we'll figure out what's screaming when we come back. Thanks for reading with me today. See you later.